be either good or bad, which I didn't know before that. I just thought you give yourself positive vitality elements, but it really depends on your actions. So this is what I kind of picked out 3 points that I think is really interesting, looking a bit deeper than what's in this chart, because this chart is kind of like what's written in the divine principle, but thinking about like day-to-day life, a way to see this a little bit. I always like to like put things with a twist, right? Like a little different than maybe what we heard before. So, I mean, the good and the bad, I think I heard that before, but I always thought generally it's good, you know, like you do good actions and that's what grows your spirit. But it's actually, you can give yourself bad vitality elements, which also has a negative impact on your spirit, right? So it's, so the living spirit elements, like the good stuff, how to give yourself positive energy and everything, that comes from having a clear, like it's from the result of your vitality elements. Anyway, I'll go more into that, but it's like the whole idea is this is really like the arrows there. You got to think it's like a give and take thing, and the truth and love from God, like the spirit elements, you know, you've got to be receiving first before you give. I think that's a big thing. We talk about living for the sake of others a lot, and that's like good deeds or vitality elements, but we don't always feel necessarily that joy and that the living spirit elements idea of feeling totally renewed and feel the joy of giving back, because maybe we're not receiving fully God's love. So that's the first point that I think it's the easier way to think of it, is like we're not supposed to be we're not supposed to put it all on ourselves. Like I am, you know, I should be doing more Handake, or I should be serving more. It's more like think about being a channel. So that idea of like receiving God's love, and God's words is a big way of receiving God's love. Handake, there's different ways of receiving life, those life elements. But the idea is you receive it and then you're giving God's love. It's not about you, how well, because I think this is where we sometimes can be hard on ourselves or give ourselves negative vitality elements, is that we feel like maybe we're trying to be, you know, help out our parents in the house or help out more with our family, and then if you instead of feeling better about it, we can get burned out, right? If we not feel like we're receiving love or being recognized. But a lot of times if you take yourself out of it and more like, how can I be a channel? Like maybe I'm inspired by something that I hear, and this is literally what I do when I try to prepare talks, is like I make it less about what I say or how well I can give it, and more like how can I just be a channel for whatever God wants to say, you know? And a lot of this, so I was receiving God's love while I was like reading the divine principle, trying to understand this concept, which also is helpful for me. But at the same time, all I'm thinking is, okay, based on what I receive from there, how can I convey it? Like let God's love work through me so that you guys can feel or recognize something from this that's valuable for you in your own way. And it doesn't depend on how good I am at speaking or all of those things, right? It's not about me, but it's about being this way for like God to work. I think that's a much healthier way of approaching like living for the sake of others and serving, and, you know, being a good friend or how you can listen and support someone is less about you, right? And more about being this channel. So I think going back at that picture, you know, if you think of that motion or channel, it's really like, it's the idea is there's movement, right? These things are flowing through. It's not like getting stuck. And that's a lot of when we feel anxiety and stress. And basically anxiety is one of those negative vitality elements we give each other, because we get stuck in like, we're not doing enough, or we say all these negative things to ourselves that bring our spirit down. So that's one of the biggest things, because I don't like to use the words good and bad, or, but in divine principle, it talks about good and evil. And I really think, you know, good and evil is in our head. Like evil is really in our mind. It's that voice that's talking you down, that's saying you're not good enough, or doubting yourself, or all those things. That's the fallen nature, that the inner conflict, so to speak. And a lot of times unintentionally, like we have this huge ideal with divine principle and we know these, like maybe these concepts, but we can feel bad. Like maybe you're reading 100K, or you hear a great talk from someone or something, and then you feel like, wow, I'm totally not doing that. And it's more, instead of thinking, putting it on yourself, what you're doing or not, is thinking more, okay, I'm inspired about this. How can I share that with someone else and inspire them, right? Like that's a very different way of thinking it than versus like taking something, trying to receive God's love, right? We don't really receive it if we feel negative about ourselves. And it's like God's love's always there, kind of like the sun. That's why it's a good analogy. But how well we're able to receive it is a lot based on how we see ourselves and our ability to receive love. So I think sometimes we give ourselves negative vitality elements when we're talking negatively to ourselves, and it's like it clogs up this ability to receive positive things. Like even if people say positive things about you, if you don't feel it yourself, right, you can't receive it. So it's like, so one of the key things for stocking up and having these good vitality elements and really feeling the benefits of spiritual growth is being able to be a good receiver and just keep that moving, keep that channel, not dwell on things. So, okay. And that, this is one of the biggest, this is a quote, I'm just going to encourage you can find it in the DP, but it was an example of really, how is the force of the conscience generated? This is like how God works, your conscience, God speaks to you. It's through give and take action. So the only way that you can get inspiration for things and things to do is like having this give and take action. And the quote is, there's more to the quote, but you could just look on page 23 later if you want. I'm just going to put little quotes here that you can look more into, because these are things I found outside of the section on vitality elements per se. But yeah, it's a really interesting question there, because a lot of times we just think our conscience is just there all the time telling us, but it's what are we having give and take with? What's that give and take that kind of determines what's coming from our conscience, what's inspiring us, or it could be the opposite, right? A negative effect on us. So the second one for optimizing is, and it kind of connects, it's that we grow by circular motion. And I think the biggest thing is to think like when you're talking about growing and trying to be a better person, and sometimes we just think of it like A to B, I'm here, A, and I want to get to there, B. But that's not really how we grow. And this is an interesting quote, Divine Principle again. Movement in a straight line cannot be sustained forever. To have eternal nature, it must move in a circle. And it's like, ooh, it's so interesting, because a lot of times we think of growth like that, right? A to B, but that's a straight line. And life is all about growing. That's our job, is like to grow in life. The spirit, this is why vitality elements, life elements, they all exist. It's to help our spirit self grow, which can only happen on earth. All right, like you go to spirit world, you actually can't really grow there. It's on earth that you're meant to grow. And that's what this whole topic is about. But the interesting thing is, like, we think we're growing that way, but if you think, and I like to think of it like a spiral. So I couldn't find an image for this. I'm just going to show it with my hands, but it's like you have your A is where you are now, and your B is maybe over here. And you go in a motion like this, where you hit B. So maybe you get a glimpse of like, oh yeah, I want to be a more patient person. And right now I feel really impatient. And then you have a moment where you're really patient, but then you come back and then you're impatient again. And you're like, man, I thought I was like much better at this, but I lost my temper and I yelled again or something. And instead of, feeling like, when you think of the A to B, right, you just feel like you went back and you lost all that effort. You just realized, no, you're in a different place than you were the other time before with your patience. And now you recognized it. And so you keep growing. And the next time you're more patient and you don't yell, you're at the B, you recognize that, oh, wow, I'm getting better at this. And you keep growing. But it's like, right? It's a very different approach. So then when you see yourself not doing what you want to do, instead of feeling bad about it, you recognize, oh, I'm growing. Like, this is a different situation, and I recognized what I did wrong, and I can do better. And it's a much healthier way to see growing. And I don't think you stay necessarily in that. Like I said, it's like a spiral. Like, you're kind of grow out, but then I think, I don't know, I'm trying to play with this idea. Maybe later it changes. I don't know, you move past certain things. But the point is not to be afraid of when things come back that we're working on. We feel like we overcame it or something. No, it might come back, but you're in a different state, and look at it that way, right? You're moving around. And then the last and final one, I kind of talked about this before, is like, one very fascinating thing that was interesting to me was that all of this idea of spiritual growth and, receiving love from God by life elements, and then giving vitality elements, doing good actions. That's what vitality elements is, good deeds ideally, or you can do bad deeds. That's what helps you grow your spirit self. But the only way for this to really work is by understanding truth. So it's like truth illuminates the innermost desires of our spirit mind. So you first have to comprehend what it is that you want. It's like your dream, and this is where I find really interesting. And I didn't have time to go into this. And if you guys are people who like reading more in the Divine Principle, there's this, the concept of individual embodiments of truth, right? Like, each of us has our own unique, we're all totally unique, and what we bring to the world and the way that we give and can bring joy to others is unique. No one else ever will be like that. But if we don't realize that in ourselves, right, like trusting our innermost desire, which is who we are, right, and the way that we can give and what we want to bring to the world, kind of our dream and our vision, you have to first have that, or like try to seek that in yourself before you can really feel the benefit of all the things that you're doing, like all the good deeds you're giving. It makes sense, right? Like, it's like gives meaning to what you do. So if you're just doing things like, I heard this talk and I should, be a channel for God's love, so I'm gonna like share God's love, or I'm gonna give a talk to others, or I'm gonna serve more at home. But if it doesn't have meaning towards like where you're driving, where you want to go in your life, what you want to do, your bigger purpose, then you don't feel that that growth. You don't feel that vitality or that energy. Does that make sense? Like, so it's like you've got to know what you want and work on that, the truth of who you are and what's important, what you're created to do, your innermost desire, which you feel it, but a lot of times we don't always act on it because we think like, oh, that's dumb. Or like, for me personally, I always loved art as a child, and I felt a lot of I felt like really that's something I wanted to do. I wanted to be an artist, but I denied it because I felt like it was self-centered. Somehow I couldn't see how a lot of the art and work, it helped me and myself, but I couldn't see how it could do big things to change the world, which is actually doesn't make sense. Culture has a huge change on the world, but it was something I was telling myself, like the opposite truth. Instead of following my natural inclinations and things that I felt inspired by, I was trying to follow other things. So I studied like politics about the world, but it didn't fit with who I was inside. And so I wasn't getting that energy, in studying and in that career track the way that I did now when I switched and focused on art and design. So it's like really part of who you are growing is connected to following your path in life. That makes sense. So sorry, I just kind of went at all these things, but we can discuss them more because I feel like it makes sense all together. But yeah, there's just a wrap up. So the 3 keys to optimizing vitality elements or optimizing your spiritual growth energy is being a channel. So keep moving God's love, giving God's love, not getting stuck on yourself or how good you are at doing things, right? Think about growth as a spiral, right? Not a straight line. And then knowing that the way you really feel like renewed and growth and your power is by doing these things in connection with your kind of your dream or who you are, what you're meant to give in the world, which is a journey in itself, finding that, but it's worth prioritizing, right? When you know that that's the key to really growing. Okay, so that's that's what I wanted to share. Is there anything I can stop the share if there's any questions or should go over? Went kind of fast. Otherwise, we can go right into discussion questions. I'm going to type them in the chat. Yeah.
I saw a diagram about vitality elements, but outside of that, I don't necessarily know too much about what they are. In that sense, do you mind kind of expanding on that? I'm sorry.
Sure, no problem. And I'll do it to as much as I can. Should I pull up the diagram again?
Yeah.
Yeah. Let me, I also can, those are that, if it helps, the page in Divine Principle that kind of matches the diagram is yeah, page 48.
Page
48. I'll share it and then I can explain. So going back to, how can I go back to this? So the idea is that you get these, the diagram's a little bit off, or maybe I am off. Okay, the life elements, yeah, here, they explain it better. So these are called living spirit elements, the one in the middle. The life elements, you get it from God. And that's feeling God's love. And there's a lot of ways we feel God's love, but through truth, through Hunduke or reading God's word, because it talks a lot about an ideal. So it stimulates like our original mind. That's one way, but of course through relationships, like genuine loving relationships, true love. But the idea is that connecting to God, that's what gives you life elements. And then your spirit self, your spirit and your physical self, you need those life elements the same way that you need light and warmth for your physical body. Like these are key things you need. So that comes from God, but your spirit self also needs from your physical self vitality elements. So that's why we need our bodies to grow. Like you only can grow your spirit on earth by doing these good deeds. So acting on things that you know to be true. So, and then when you do those things, the vitality elements, it gives your spirit gives back this energy. It's called living spirit elements to your body, which is the idea, you know, they talk about it in here, like when people receive grace from a heavenly spirit, they understand many positive, they undergo many positive changes in their physical self. They feel infinite joy, new strength welling up in them, and can even drive away illness. Such phenomena occur because the physical self receives living spirit elements from the spirit self. So it's like, that's the key things that keep you, and you know, people who have incredible stories that went through really difficult things but could overcome, it's because they had pretty strong living spirit elements, right? Even if their physical situation is pretty difficult, you can survive a lot. So that's the idea. But when I went into this, I was thinking that it was the vitality elements that give you that. And that's where I learned that, you know, it's the vitality elements is basically deeds that you do. So you can do either good things or you can do bad things. And obviously if you do good things, you'll feel these living spirit elements. But if you do bad things, you won't feel them. And a lot of times it's not necessarily that we're doing, I'm thinking COVID time too, it's not necessarily that we're doing bad things or hurting people if you're interacting, but how we kind of talk to ourselves can also be a negative vitality element, if that makes sense. So is that clear?
It's lovely.
I
Thank
explained
you.
that more from the beginning.
You did
yeah.
very well. Thanks.
And I think this is really powerful, the atmosphere of freedom, because like the third point I was sharing about how you really know your truth or your calling and live, like there's such an incredible freedom, the idea of like co-creating with God. Co-creating with God. Like it's not just like God's telling you, you know, you're supposed to be this way, but like you really, this is what I feel in my own life a lot, is like the inspirations I get, it comes from God. And the more that I act on that, like my conscience and trust, the more I feel incredible confidence and like freedom, because I don't, like when you're totally responsible, nothing that happens, I just take responsibility, like figure out how to make it work. And there's such a freedom there. I'm not controlled by circumstances, if that makes sense. And I think that really comes from this, you know, the more we grow, the more free we feel, even though sometimes it's maybe sounds constricting or like, yeah. And that's what I wanted to bring up as a discussion, is your thoughts on like good and bad vitality elements, or good and bad is the best word, ways that you feel like you give yourself energy, examples of serving, or if there's ways you feel that you don't, or that have been unhelpful, particularly now. I think that's good to reflect on. Yeah, that's one question.
Okay. Do you have a copy of it ready to paste or something, or can you send it to me? I can put it in the chat for everyone to see.
Yeah, I can copy it in the chat.
That'd be great. Thank
you. What are some examples of good vitality elements? And then the other is like, what are some, this is more like personal example, or you could give general, but of negative vitality elements. I think it helps to bring it down to life. And I gave some examples from me, but it's more important like what comes up for you guys you can think of. Particularly maybe in the past few months or with COVID, if there's things that have helped you feel more energy you've noticed, or if a story like that, and then things that you feel bring down your energy, maybe why. Self-awareness here.
Awesome. Great. So usually we do breakout groups for these. So we discuss them all together. I'll make it usually quite a while, 40 minutes timer or something.
Okay.
So I'll put that on.
But the other thing I can type.
Well, would that be a good format, or would you prefer if we do it for like 20 minutes, come back? Or
yeah, I think that's a good discuss. Whatever you guys normally do.
Does anyone have a opinion? We like to do the normal 40 minutes, or do 20 minutes and come back and go back for more questions? Anyone? 40 minutes is good. Cool. Okay. So was there another question you wanted, Juna?
Yeah, sorry. I'll